This show is strictly for educational purposes. The opinions expressed on the show are personal to the individuals appearing in the show and not those of Thinking Tree Ecoholics Private Limited. The show is not intended to offend or defame any individual, entity, caste, community, race, or religion, or to denigrate any institution, person, living or dead. Listener discretion is strongly advised.
Hello and welcome to Ecoholics, the Thinking Tree series, a talk show where we invite intellectuals and professionals to talk about various economic issues. Today, we're going to discuss about the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. And for that discussion, we have with us Ms. Gauzia Sheikh. Ms. Gauzia is a legal consultant at Red Intelligence Asia as well as a consultant with the World Bank Group. Ms. Gauzia, we welcome you and we are really happy to have you here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So, to begin with our conversation, I'd like to introduce this particular topic to students first, and then we'll get into the conversation. Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code 2016. Initially, when we look back to the Indian economy, economic reforms were introduced in India in 1991, which gave the firms, especially the private firms, the right to enter into the market, which was then later followed by the Competition Act, which gave them the right to compete against each other healthily in their respective industries. But a major missing till 2016 was the right to exit. So the IBC 2016 majorly is a lot of things, but majorly it is all about expediting the process of liquidation. And we want a panoramic view with regards to IBC 2016, which is why we are getting into this conversation with Ms. Gauzia, who is also a legal consultant and who is going to provide her legal expertise in this particular discussion. So, Ms. Gauzia, the very first thing that I would like to ask you is to give us a generic perspective on what are the foundational, or let's say what are the core objectives of this IBC 2016.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start. So before the IBC came into the picture, insolvency and bankruptcy laws in the country were widely scattered. They were scattered across statutes and across courts and tribunals. So I think the primary objective behind the IBC was to have one single comprehensive legal framework to deal with insolvencies and bankruptcies in the country. Second, of course, as you mentioned, is the right to exit. Now, where do these concepts of right to entry and right to exit come from? It's largely an often used phrase of ease of doing business that we hear about. We hear about it in terms of World Bank rankings of countries, etc. Now, what is the ease of business? The ease of business is to have smooth processes for first starting a business, second, running the business. But if I feel that I can no longer run the business, that I am no longer able to repay my debts, then I should have the option to exit the market. IBC provides this exit. This exit may take two forms. In your introduction, you mentioned speeding up the process of liquidation. Uh, I would not say it's exactly that. There are two options.
Yeah.
One is you resolve the company by way of restructuring. So there is a new owner of the company that the company gets transferred to, or there is liquidation. Liquidation is can be equal to pretty much the death of the company. So it's two ways. One is you resolve the company. Second is you liquidate the company. These are the two ways that you can exit the market. Now, I need to have the right of exit. Great. But now, how do I make the most out of this exit such that nobody loses or nobody loses too much? That's where we come into the second objective of the IBC, which is value maximization of the firm. Whatever I say now is in respect to the firm or the company. That is because the personal insolvency provisions of the IBC have not yet been notified. So the IBC is not used for personal insolvencies. So why do you need value maximization of the firm in the first place? any firm that comes into the IBC is a stressed firm. Every day that a stressed firm spends being continuing its business adds to its losses, adds to its costs, also leads to depreciation of assets. So the problem here is that you have to arrive at a solution such that you are maximizing the value of the firm, so that even at the point of exit, you have gained as much as possible from it, not just the company itself, but also the other stakeholders. Now, as I mentioned, every day is a day of stress and loss. So the IBC's third important objective is timely resolution, speedy resolution. The more time you waste, the more the firm suffers. So it's best that the process of resolution itself is carried out fast, in a speedy manner, in a timely manner.
Right.
Now then we come to the fourth objective. You are trying to maximize value and you are trying to do it really fast. So what is the one thing that you need to look out for? You need to be on the lookout for balancing the interests of all stakeholders that are involved in the process. So, because you would want the proceedings, and again, pre-IBC, the proceedings were such that a lot of the smaller creditors got nothing out of the process. The IBC has tried to deal with that. So you want to balance the interests of all stakeholders in such a manner that you don't compromise on the other two as well, on value maximization and on speedy resolution. So what does the law do? The law provides some protections to the smaller operational creditors, which are basically your suppliers or service providers, etc.
Right.
And it also provides some protection to people who did not agree to the way the resolution was decided upon, dissenting creditors, when you come to the resolution process. So just taking a recap.
Yeah.
The first is, of course, you wanted a comprehensive framework. You wanted this framework to provide for value maximization.
Right.
This value maximization is possible only when you have timely resolution. And while you need to run towards these two goals, you need to do it while balancing the interests of all stakeholders. So this, in a nutshell, is the IBC for you.
Correctly put and very precisely put, Ms. Gausia. And the one of the objectives, or let's say one of the components of IBC 2016, as you clearly mentioned, are the stakeholders or the operational creditors. Now, when we talk about liquidation, these operational creditors would perceive this process as a tool for recovery. Do you believe that this is where the stakeholders are going to push the company to, or is there a process of within the IBC framework wherein the protection not only goes to the stakeholders but also to the company? Like you said, the reconstruction process is also there, which is also a part of IBC. So please throw some light on that as well.
Yeah, so I think this debate on whether the IBC is a recovery tool or not has been going on since the law came out in 2016. So the first thing I would like to say is that the IBC is not and was not intended to be a recovery tool. But I know where the argument comes from. Okay, so just look at the IBC process. What happens the moment a firm enters into the IBC process? The first thing that happens is that the board of directors, the erstwhile board of directors, is suspended and a resolution professional is appointed, and this resolution professional is a third party individual who is skilled and equipped enough to run the company, and he takes the helm or she takes the helm of the company and they run the company. Then what happens? Then when you come to the question of how to resolve the company, what should the restructuring be like, or does the company need to get into liquidation? Who decides this? This is decided by a committee of creditors, which includes the financial creditors or banks, NBFCs, other financial institutions who have lent to the company. So even this decision is taken away from the company and it goes to the creditors. So you've lost control of the company. You are not running the company anymore. and any decision as to the future of the company is also in the hands of a separate committee. So the promoters and the existing management have a lot to lose out. So it is not the IBC which is a recovery tool. It is the threat of IBC that looks like a recovery tool. That
Right.
I, as an operational creditor, can go to the company and be like, hey, pay me. If you don't pay me up, I will take you into insolvency. And then the promoter's like, okay, I have a lot to lose here. The other thing that often happens is that if the OC say files for insolvency already, then still there are options to settle. So you settle at that point and that particular person gets recovery. But then once a petition has been admitted and once insolvency proceedings have started, even a settlement requires a 90% approval of the committee of creditors. So it balances out. You may or may not get your entire money using this tool, right? Because the committee of creditors has to decide on whether a settlement can happen. Although you
Absolutely.
may be the person who triggered the insolvency, but
Yeah.
still, another very important aspect of the IBC is that it is a collective proceeding. It is not one guy seeking recovery from another company. It is a company which is dealing with how to restructure its debts and how to deal with all of its creditors, financial
Right.
creditors, operational creditors, other creditors. So there is, I think, an inherent system of checks and balances which prevents it from being the recovery tool that it is
Right.
popularly misconceived to be.
Right.
But yes, I agree that the threat of going into IBC definitely can be used as a recovery tool by any creditor. I
Absolutely.
think that clarifies it.
Right. Actually, this is a very interesting and uh, if you say a broader perspective of IBC that you have put across, which is very necessary, especially for students to understand who write competitive examinations and these questions are thrown on to the students. So the bigger picture is to understand the perspective, and definitely this is what you have clearly narrated. Now, my next question is about again a very important part of our economy is the MSMEs. And although we say that MSMEs are the backbone of Indian economy, yet um, these are these have to be actually mentioned in the correct perspective, and IBC 2016 has to also throw some light on how MSMEs should be restructured so that they can actually be the backbone and a very strong backbone of the Indian economy. What do you want to say about this and how IBC can help MSMEs grow?
Yeah, so I'll show you. I'll try to explain as to how it has already been helped. Again, as I said before, the previous regime did not provide the smaller creditors, which
Yeah.
could have been your MSMEs,
Yeah.
enough power or enough, let's call it recovery at the end of the proceedings. Right? So let's look at MSMEs from that's the creditor perspective and then from a debtor perspective. Let's look at them as creditors first. Before March of 2020, the threshold of default to trigger the IBC was rupees 1 lakh. So even if I had a debt that was defaulted upon of 1 lakh 1 rupee,
Yeah.
I could go to the insolvency tribunal, the National Company Law Tribunal, and I could initiate insolvency proceedings. So MSMEs got that right to be able to trigger insolvency proceedings. Okay.
Right.
Now look at it from the debtor perspective. As debtors, again, if an MSME is the business of the MSME has failed or it cannot function anymore, then the MSME can use Section 10 of the IBC as a corporate debtor and file for insolvency and have hope to have restructuring.
Yeah.
Now, if the students have been following the growth of the law, then
Yes.
very soon after the IBC came in, Section 29A was introduced.
Mhm.
This was a section which basically put certain disqualifications on the kind of bidders that can bid for a company.
Okay.
Largely, in effect, the disqualifications meant that the company cannot go back to the original promoters. The original promoters cannot rescue the company.
Mhm.
But it was realized that for MSMEs, it may be hard to get third-party bidders.
Mm.
So
Right.
29A, yeah, the applicability of 29A was later removed from the MSMEs. So for
Mhm.
MSMEs, even there, the buyout could be done by the promoter itself.
Mhm.
Okay, now let's look at the present times. We are in a post-pandemic world, or we are in a current pandemic world,
Yeah.
where stress in the market is increasing day by day. Credit markets are extremely stressed right now. Creditors,
Right.
debtors, bidders, everybody is stressed.
Yeah.
So what did the government do? They realized that, hey, this is a time when if small the MSMEs, if MSMEs were to be taken into insolvency, there is such amount of stress in the market that it is likely that they will all go into liquidation.
Mm.
So what did the government do? In March of 2020, the triggering threshold was increased from 1 lakh to 1 crore.
Mm.
So in a way, they were protected from having proceedings initiated against them.
Mhm.
The second thing that has been announced is that the government is soon going to come out with a special resolution framework focusing only on MSMEs.
MSMEs. Okay.
So until then, well, you have the IBC protecting the MSMEs,
Yeah.
but let's see how the proposed framework comes out and what that does for the
Yes.
MSMEs that maybe the IBC did not do, or maybe in the post-pandemic world could not have done.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. MSMEs do require the protection, which you have clearly mentioned, and the extended protection till we do not know. These are uncertain and testing times for everyone, so we do not know till when this pandemic is going to stretch itself. But yes, of course, correct planning and strategy making can definitely help the MSMEs out. My another concern, or let's say a question, is again related to the insolvency process. And now when we talk about Indian economy, and we already do understand NPAs and the growing of NPAs, especially we have seen the recessionary phase that came into the Indian economy, and then the numbers went higher and higher. Now, in this context, how can the IBC 2016 make use of all its objectives to reduce the NPAs, because will again become a huge problem for in India, and we have these common terms that we talk about: twin balance sheet problem or four balance sheet problem and all those things. So what can be the correct perspective to look at it, and how can we understand how will the banking sector and how will the banking sector revive these firms from NPA problem?
So I think, while IBC is still I repeat, is not a recovery tool.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
the only thing that banks can really do is one, they have, and moving a little away from the IBC process also,
Mm-hmm.
the RBI also has its own out of court restructuring procedure. There is a
Yeah, yeah.
circular that was released on June 7th of 2019, which is, it's just completed a year. So there is an out of court
Okay.
procedure as well, which also
Okay.
requires certain things like early identification and classification of accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't directly go from a standard non-defaulting account to an NPA. That's not the time
Right.
at which you should inform. Yeah, you should make it known that defaults are taking place.
Of
It
course.
provides for special mention accounts 1, special mention accounts 2, and then an NPA. So
Yeah.
there's early detection of stress in the market.
Hmm.
So that's one way of dealing with it. And then when you've seen it go become an NPA, then you can either use the out of court proceeding under the June 7 circular, or you can use the IB. Now,
Right.
just as on a side note, initially we did see reluctance on the part of the banking sector to use the IBC.
Yeah.
But I think once the RBI also had to give a little bit of a nudge and started with processes that incentivize using the IBC. And even the June 7th circular has certain advantages, such as reversal of provisioning, the additional provisioning that happens under the circular if IBC proceedings are initiated. So the RBI, as the banking regulator, has been taking steps towards dealing with the NPA problem. And there is always the IBC. I think if you look at the March numbers from the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India has released, around 44% of the petitions that were filed before the NCLTs were filed by financial creditors, which were banks.
Yeah.
So I guess these tools are being used, and they should be able to, I won't say end the NPA problem.
Of course not. Of course not. That's something that is a very unrealistic terms on which we would talk then. But
So
yeah, on realistic terms, yes.
Yeah, I will not be a blind optimist, but I will say that at least the tools to deal with the NPA problem are available, and IBC is one of them.
All right. All right. On a similar note, you addressed even in your objectives about the educating authority and the judgment procedure and everything. Now, as per because you are a legal consultant also, and you would have seen all these things happening around yourself. Tell us about is there the capacity that we have in our economy as the judgment procedure or these proceedings, or we talk about the educating authority, is it sufficient that we have right now? Because you mentioned in your in the objectives of IBC 2016 also that the faster the process will happen, the faster the liquidation or reconstruction, either of the two will happen, and we can quickly move out of the vicious cycle. So tell me, what kind of capacity do we have right now in our economy, and what can we do to increase that if we do not have that capacity then?
So when you look at the NCLT, I think people often forget that the NCLT is not just dealing with just IBC cases. The NCLT also looks at company law cases.
Okay.
Now you have company law and you have the IBC. These are two fields of law that have immense amount of litigation, right? So the NCLTs are dealing with some of the biggest caseloads. Now, what is the capacity enough? I would say that efforts are being made to increase the capacity. I think in the past year or two itself, the capacity of the number of members of the NCLT, judicial members and technical members, has doubled.
Yeah.
And so have benches been increased across the country.
Okay.
So efforts are on to increase the capacity. The other thing that I would say is that right now, when you look at, again, I will go back to the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because of course it is affecting
of course
every sector and
every
infrastructure institution.
Yes.
So right now we had an ordinance that was released this month, an IBC amendment ordinance, which says that for any default that occurs on or after the 25th of March 2020, you cannot initiate IBC proceedings.
Okay.
Up to a period of 6 months, and this 6-month period is extendable up to 1 year. So we can presume that this is a breathing space that is given to especially the NCLTs to really deal with not only the backlog but to get back on their feet, because right now you don't have any institution across the board, not just IBC institutions, you don't have any institution that is functioning on full capacity.
Right, absolutely.
Because of the lockdown.
Yeah.
So in that way, we see that there is some breathing space. But we also should not forget that once the effects of the pandemic are over and once there is some sort of flattening of the curve, then cases are again going to be on the rise. So I guess capacity building is something which develops as the law develops.
Right,
It
right.
will never be sufficient. It will always be dynamic. It will
Hmm.
always adjust to the requirement that the law puts forth. It will
Right.
always depend on how much the law is being used.
Mm-hmm.
At present, there is definitely a need to build capacity in NCLTs, and we know that these processes are on, and
Of
they
course.
will always be on. I don't personally, I am of the view that you can never have enough caseload unless there are means of predicting the caseload,
Huh.
which I am
That's true.
aware that economists are capable of doing that, and
Mm-hmm.
I do know of some that are uh, trying to predict caseloads.
Mm-hmm.
That will again, that is to facilitate the capacity building exercise. How
Right.
much capacity should be there at one point of time is will always be a variable number.
Mm.
So these processes for capacity building also will, in my opinion, be ongoing.
Yeah, of course. That is eventually that is true, and everyone. It's not just about the pandemic, and now that we are suffering from it, and all the industry and every other sector is hit by it. But of course, even if no pandemic, then still the process has to go on, and it's all about demand and supply. So
Yeah,
it's
pretty much.
eventually true. So but okay, and students, I believe, must have received a lot of points with respect to something that I stated earlier as well, a bigger perspective, because IBC 2016 is a very important issue and a topic for each and everyone to know. Now that we live in a dynamic world, everything is so much correlated that we really should know all these things. And the legal terminology kept aside, at least the meaning of it and how in depth it can affect possibly the structure of our economy should definitely be noticed. And I believe, yes,
Yeah, if I may interrupt, uh,
sure.
I think what is missing in how students perceive the law
Mm-hmm.
is that they don't always look at the policy objectives behind the law. Now,
Mm.
if you take the IBC itself, before the IBC came out, you had the Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee that was formed, which eventually produced the first draft of the law.
Yeah.
If you read just that report, you will understand exactly what the problem was
Mm-hmm.
and exactly how the IBC aimed at resolving those problems
Yeah.
and exactly how it created infrastructure in the form of
Mm.
a regulator, in the form of resolution professionals, in the form of information utilities
Yeah.
to make this process such that it achieves all the objectives that they have discussed. So for your
Right.
students, I would definitely say that please go through the Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee report, which is available online,
Yeah.
uh, and it's not restricted access; it's public access. So
Mm-hmm.
please read it because that will give you a perspective of the law. Once you have understood what problem a law was introduced to combat, it's
Mm.
easier for you to understand the law because then it's a matter of common sense, right?
Exactly.
The
Right. It's a
problem
matter of
was
logic.
exactly, you can logically decipher it. If you just
Yeah.
take that, okay, earlier we had 10 laws, 10 courts, and
Mm.
maybe you had simultaneous proceedings by two creditors in two separate courts under two
Mm.
separate laws. So, what should we really do? Why not? Let's have one comprehensive law. It's
Yeah.
logic,
It's logic.
right?
True.
So I think I would urge students to look at what the situation and the circumstances were before the law was introduced. to
Mhm.
understand exactly what the law is trying to do, and then to take a step ahead, especially for students who are looking to do research.
Yeah.
You can critically analyze a law only when you know what it set out to do in the first place.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
so I would really urge students to not only read the BLRC report, but to always approach a law from this perspective. To go to the
True.
starting point and then move on to reading the law and understanding it.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
exactly like, reading the book cover to cover, and then you can, gain why the preface and why the epilogue.
Yeah,
So it's
pretty much.
always like that. And it's absolutely true. And I believe that the students must have received a lot of not just information, because information is available everywhere, but a lot of, if I talk about gaining perspective, or if I talk about how logically you interpret into all these things, whether it's about the objectives of IBC, or whether it's about the MSMEs and what the government is doing, or whether it's about the IBC panel and the way forward, how it looks, how the legal perspective can be looked at it. So I believe that students must have understood a lot from this conversation.
I
And
hope so.
yes, because of course it was a very nice discussion, and you have interpreted a lot of legal terminologies in a very simplistic way. So I think that way students must have definitely noted down a few important points from it. And concludingly, I would like to ask you to just say a few words for our platform, for the students who are learning from it, and for students who are listening to professionals like you, who are experience holders in different fields, not just economics but dynamic perspectives. So yeah.
So, first of all, I would like to once again thank you for having me on the platform, for giving me this opportunity. I feel Ecoholics is a great platform, not only in terms of how you are using courses for people who are preparing for civil services, or how you are releasing research papers or any publications, book reviews. I browsed through your website a bit, and it all goes to show that there is so much information out there,
Mm.
and what your platform does is pretty much aggregates a lot of that information and hands it over to the students. I
Right.
think that in itself is pretty much such a wide gamut of things that students can learn from.
Mm.
And then you have interactions like these with people who
Yeah.
are working on a particular field or on a particular law, or are in the midst of dealing with issues that are presently going on in the country. I
Hmm.
think these interactions also help a lot. And I would say that if I were a student at this time, then this would have been very useful to really understand how to go about looking at ideas, concepts, laws,
Yeah.
how to go about understanding them. And I'm sure when I've seen previous videos also,
Yeah.
you are basically you've already created a platform to simplify concepts for the students. I
Hmm.
think now it is just for the students to become the sponge and to grasp in
Absorb.
as much as
Yeah.
possible and just keep absorbing all of the information that you have. And there is such a wide reach because of this platform being an
Yeah.
e-platform.
Right.
Anybody anywhere can really access your platform and find out about economics, econometrics, law. You are providing them the tool. It is now on the students to really take the initiative and to go beyond textbooks and to go
Yeah.
beyond college and lectures and to go beyond your essential readings per se, and to
True.
really understand concepts from a broader perspective.
Yeah.
And anyway, they are the future of the country, and
Of
you
course.
are in a way nurturing the future of the country. So I would only encourage students to not stop and to work as hard as possible. There is a Latin phrase that I am very fond of, which is called it goes amat victoria curum. I'm
Okay.
sure I'm pronouncing it wrong, but in essence, it means that victory favors the prepared.
True.
So which
That's
favors
a great
the
line.
hard. You have to be hardworking and you have to work as hard as possible to widen your horizon. It's not benefiting anybody else. Yes, you are the future of the country, but you also have to look out for yourself and how you grow.
Yeah.
Your growth and the country's growth is interlinked. They need
True.
to also understand the responsibility that is on them.
Right.
So, working hard and not stopping at anything and trying to gain as much knowledge as possible through tools like Ecoholics is all that I would encourage students to do, and to be students for life pretty much. You
Yeah.
never stop learning. You can
Yes.
never stop learning. You learn something new every day, be it from the practical aspects of life or from the academic perspective or in the professional perspective. So I would just urge them to keep an open mind and to use the tools available to them, and yeah,
Yeah.
to keep growing. And I am grateful to you for giving me this opportunity to reach out to all the students out there and to share a little bit of the knowledge that I have. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much for your amazing and encouraging words for the students. I definitely hope that all the things that you pointed out, not just about the legal perspective, but also about life and learning, would definitely help them out in their respective careers and respective lives. Thank you so much for being there in our conversation, and thank you for giving your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Have a good day. Thank you.
Have a good day.